All right, good morning and welcome to the Osterville Village Library. My name is Amy Wolf and I'm the programming director here at the OVL. Thank you so much for joining us today for this exciting talk on the winter birds of Cape Cod, presented by naturalist John Hanlon. John provides programs for groups such as the Friends of Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge, Barnstable Land Trust, Chatham Bars Inn, and the Alzheimer Center of Cape Cod, among others throughout the Cape. He's a former park ranger and educator at Provincetown High School and is currently working with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and Cape Cod Community College. And we are honored to have him here with us today for this fascinating talk on winter birds.
Thank you. So as Amy mentioned, I was a biology teacher in Provincetown when there was a Provincetown High School for 20 years. I was a park ranger with the National Seashore for 26 years. Right now I work with the Wampanoag tribe. I'm an assistant education director. So I wish I got kids out doing more naturalist things, but it's a lot of paperwork stuff, unfortunately. But helping our kids, we have kids in 7 districts from New Bedford to Barnstable, and working with those kids as a counselor mostly. And at Cape Cod Community College, I run a program at night for adult students. Again, not really bird related, but people who get their GED or are learning English as a second language. I run a program teaching them basic courses, and so they can start working on a degree. So happy to be here today to talk about one of my favorite things, birds. And in January, a lot of people who don't live here on Cape Cod, and I know you all must, otherwise you wouldn't be here today, they think that there's no birds on Cape Cod in the winter. But there's actually more bird species on the Cape in the winter than there are in the summer. So some of these that we'll talk about are just here in the winter. And hopefully you're familiar with some of them, but I'm sure there'll be some that you haven't seen yet. Some of these you have to kind of get out onto the beach to see. And many of them won't be here once the summer comes. They'll head back north. So this is, like the description of the program said, this is their Florida. This is where they come for the winter, a lot of these birds. Okay, so it's very informal. If you have a question during the presentation, just raise your hand and I can call on you. I might ask questions of you, and feel free to just respond. I do have some of the species that I'll show you today on the presentation. These are all birds that just come here in the winter. So feel free after to come up and take a look at them if you want. They were all found washed up on the beach. I have something called a scavenging permit. It costs $10 a year, and you can keep birds that aren't game species. So if you can't hunt a bird, if you can't legally hunt a species, you're not supposed to be able to possess it. But if you do it for educational purposes, you can get a scavenger permit. The expensive part comes in when you have to find someone to taxiderm them. I wouldn't recommend it right now with avian influenza going on. I haven't picked up any birds the last few years. These are older than that. But okay, so let's get started. So when we talk about birds in the winter on Cape Cod, or anytime really, you're really talking about habitat. And that's why if you go to a variety of habitats, you're going to see a variety of birds. And Cape Cod is great because it's so small, yet we have all these great habitats so close to each other. So all these pictures are actually from my old job at the National Seashore. Does anyone recognize any of these places? So so the Fort Hill, the bottom left, that's open meadow habitat that's maintained for cultural reasons. What Cape Cod looked like 150 years ago, but it also provides a lot of habitat for birds. We don't have much of that left on Cape Cod, that meadow habitat. Although in this area, there seems to be quite a bit, like around the airport and all. So Fort Hill, anyone else? Well, the ocean, yeah, so Oh, the top right, so that is the Atlantic Cedar Swamp in Wellfleet. Yeah. No, I'm sorry, that's the Red Maple Swamp in Eastham. This is the Red Cedar Swamp in Wellfleet here, but this is the upland portion of it. So we have wetlands, we have pine oak forest, that's the predominant forest on Cape Cod. In the middle on the bottom, that's a pond in the beech forest in Provincetown. So ponds, especially in the winter, ponds are a really important, a really great place to see waterfowl. Lots of varieties of waterfowl come to the Cape in the winter. And when they're not frozen, they're really good places. The reason we get so many here is because inland, those ponds might be frozen, but they might be open here. So those birds come here. They only go as far south as they need to for open water. So maybe with this cold stretch we're getting, a lot of the ducks might go a little further south, like down to Long Island or Rhode Island, before they have to head back north in the spring. And then the top in the middle there, that's a salt marsh. So that's Coast Guard Beach in Eastham, the salt marsh behind the beach. Barrier Beach always has a marsh behind it, like Sandy Neck. And then the beach itself, the flats in the bay or even the outer beach, provides a lot of habitat for winter birds. Okay, so let's talk about the beaches first. So everyone knows our gulls, right? No such thing as a seagull, but there's different kinds of gulls. So we have on the top there, you guys are looking at, yeah, top left, that's a herring gull, like the fish, the herring. So that's a year-round species of Cape Cod, but it's definitely something you'd see here in the winter. And below that is a ring-billed gull. So ring-billed gulls are about half the size of a herring gull, and they have a black ring around their bill. They tend to be more of an inland breeding gull. They don't breed on the Cape, but they come here in the winter. So if you go to the beach, you're likely to see herring gulls, ring-billed gulls, and then this other guy here to the right is a greater blackback gull. Those are the biggest of the gulls we get here. So there's probably a dozen other species of gulls that you may get rare spottings of, like if you're out at Sandy Neck. But they can be pretty complicated. But if 95% of what you're going to see are these three gulls. And the thing with gulls is they take 3 years to get their full plumage. So they're really beautiful birds. If you look at them, it's amazing. For what they get into with garbage and all that, they're always really clean, that beautiful white feathers. So the herring gull is more of a gray wing, and then the blackback is bigger and has the dark black wing. But they don't get that until their 3rd year, sometimes 4th year. So if you ever see them with like the mottled brown, those are just immature, like teenager gulls. They're full size, but they're don't have the full breeding plumage yet. So the blackback has the pink legs. Both the herring and the blackback have this little orange thing on their bill there. And that's something that for feeding their young. So when they are getting food and they bring it back to the nest in the summer, when the chick taps on that little orange spot, she'll throw the food up and regurgitate it for the baby. So next time you're looking at gulls, notice that orange dot. So if you're just kind of walking through the dunes or the upper part of the beach, this time of year only, you're likely to see some of these birds. So that guy to the left is a horned lark. Has anyone ever seen one of those? They're really cool. They've got like a little crest, you know, like a cardinal kind of, but kind of points on both sides. They've got the black mask, they've got yellow color. To the upper part of the beach, you're gonna have a good chance of seeing them, usually alone. If you see a flock of birds in the upper part of the beach, it's usually gonna be these guys. These are snow buntings. So a lot of people are familiar with like the indigo bunting or the painted bunting, the more colorful buntings that you might get in your feeders in the spring as they go north. But so they're related, but these guys breed in the Arctic and they come here in the winter. So our beach is kind of like, and I'll say this a lot with a lot of other species, our beach is kind of like the Arctic for some of these species, these wide open spaces. And that's, they're not looking to breed while they're here. They're just looking for food. And then they'll head north to breed in the spring. With most of these winter birds, it's pretty much like clockwork, especially with the waterfowl. They show up November 1st and they're gone by April 1st. Pretty reliable that you can count on that. If you're going to be down at the shore in the winter, these are sanderlings. So again, a lot of people just call them sandpipers. There are several species of sandpipers, but these are actually not one of them. They look like a sandpiper, but they're called a sanderling. So to the left is their winter plumage, and to the right is their summer plumage. So if you're seeing them on the beach this time of year, you're going to see like with the gray. But as spring starts to come, or when they first arrive in the fall, they're going to be more this brownish color. And sometimes they'll stay here year round if they're not breeding, but the breeders all go back to the Arctic. So they don't breed here, but you might see them here year round, but much more numbers in the winter. And here's just an example of their map of their range. So the pink is way up there is where they breed in the Arctic. And then the blue right along the mid-Atlantic coast. So Cape Cod is about as far north as they will breed. Yellow being where they pass through during migration in the spring and in the fall. Not sure what else. It might be out of place, but okay, we'll keep going. Has anyone ever seen gannets? Okay, where do you see them? Dowses Beach?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I saw one in the middle of the canal.
Yeah, I've seen them at the canal, the outer beach of the Cape. So this is a bird that breeds on islands, rocky islands, way up. I bet that's what that map was for. Yeah, that's their winter range is the blue, but their breeding is way up in those pink little rocky islands up in the Arctic or subarctic, Labrador, that area. And they never come to shore. They spend their whole life at sea. They just go to these rocky islands to breed. So on Cape Cod, we're really lucky to see them because we stick out in the ocean, especially in the winter, but sometimes you see them in the spring and fall. You'll see these huge flocks of them diving for fish. And especially after a storm. So like after this storm passes through on Monday, if you get out there Monday night or Tuesday morning, you probably have a pretty good chance of seeing these folks. It's possible in Nantucket Sound at Dallas, but more likely in the bay or on the ocean, out on the lower Cape. So where you're going to find these. And you'll just see these beautiful white birds. Without binoculars, you won't be able to see them too well because they're usually pretty far off. But they'll just dive head first into the water. And here's a picture of that. So sometimes you'll see them individually doing that, and sometimes you'll see like big flocks of them doing that. And I found one of these once. It's in my freezer. I just haven't been able to afford to get it stuffed yet. But the skull of these has a huge ossification in the front. So it's very thick in the front so they don't get a concussion when they dive in head first. They have a long bill. They can catch fish and then pop up. If you ever find one of these on land, you want to, if you can, mean, I've caught one before and brought it to wild care, but you got to be careful. If you can get help, it does need to be rehabilitated, because if they're on land, they can't fly like loons. They're diving birds like this. They can't lift off from the land. They need water to lift off. So oftentimes if a bird's on land like a loon or a gannet, it's dehydrated, it hasn't eaten in a while, so it does need to be rehabilitated, and then they'll release it. Okay, so here's another species of birds that you also find just in the ocean. They breed in these rocky islands as well, up in Labrador and north. And they're related to, the closest thing we have that are related to penguins. They're a classification of birds called alcids. A really great place to see them is in some of the harbors or the Cape Cod Canal. So if you go to the parking lot on the Sandwich side of the Cape Cod Canal, oftentimes there's these on the right here, these common murres that are just diving for fish. It's a really good spot to see them. The dovekey and the razorbill, you're more likely to see them offshore, mostly on the outer Cape, not in flocks as much. So you really need binoculars to see them. The dovekey are really cute. They're just a little, look like about the size of a Nerf football. And it's amazing how they can survive. Like, think about how cold it is today and with the storm coming and all, but this is what they thrive in. And they can be out there in that water all the time, and they're just diving for fish. And they're here all winter, and then they head north. Barnstable Harbor, you might see some of these, or Wellfleet harbors are usually a good place too. The dovekies and the razorbills and the murres, they'll come in. All right, so everyone knows the Canada goose, right? Not Canadian goose, Canada goose. And they used to come here in the winter and then migrate north, but they were used as live decoys for duck hunters for years. And when that was outlawed, like in the 1940s, a lot of the hunters just let the geese go. And the geese we have now are the descendants of those birds. So they don't have the migratory instincts. They're not afraid of people. They'll be out in the baseball field and all that. But there are still wild flocks of Canada geese. Not so much here anymore, but sometimes if you go further inland, you'll see, like, if you see a really high up V-shaped flock heading north in the spring or south in the fall, those are some of the still migratory ones. Yeah.
I don't know how long ago it was, but it was this fall. I was coming down 151 towards Mashpee Commons, and it must have been like 4 sets of geese, Canada geese, flying north. Huge V.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just like 20 geese. It was amazing, the number that were flying north. I've never seen that I can remember.
Was it really high up?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean,
They could have been migratory.
It wasn't like over my house,
Yeah.
you know, kind of feeling. It was further than that. I don't know what you mean by way high up, but it was
Like
hundreds.
you would only see them as like little specks up there, but you'd hear them.
Not that
High.
No.
Okay. Yeah. But even still, even if they're close to the ground, I mean, all the geese are gonna travel in these V-shaped flocks, and they're moving from feeding area to roosting area to water, things like that. So I mean, it's always beautiful to see geese flying, It's an aerodynamic thing. So the one in front, who's the leader, kind of leads the way, and then the ones behind them, they each draft off the one in front of them, so they use less energy flying. Yeah. Do they rotate leader? I've heard they do. I don't know if I've never seen research on that, but people have said they do. Yeah, because geese, a lot of times if you see a flock of geese, it's a family. Kind of like turkeys. They'll have their young, they'll raise their young, and then the next year, the last year's young, who are now full size, like teenagers, they stay with the flock and they help raise the young. So you'll see a flock, oftentimes it's like 3 generations, and they will rotate the dominant bird. So next to the geese is the Atlantic brant. So that's that bird on the table here on the far end of the table. So a lot of people see these and they confuse them. The brant are about 2/3 the size of a Canada goose. They don't have the full white mask, just a little bit of white under their chin. And you're only going to see them here in the winter. So again, November 1st to April 1st, they're on the Cape. They're pretty plentiful. You'll see them in Nantucket Sound a lot, more so in the harbors and in the Sound than on the outer Cape. They prefer the more sheltered bays. They're feeding on sea lettuce, all the sea lettuce, seaweed that's out in the water. So they're herbivores completely, as opposed to most birds that are living in the ocean that are fish eaters. So if you are hunting, they do taste better than like mergansers and other things because of their diet. You won't see them on baseball fields or things like that. You're going to see them in the water. They may come out onto the beach to rest, or on the rocks. Oftentimes you'll see them. And they breed up in Greenland, Newfoundland, up there in the subarctic, on the tundra. And then they come here for the winter. Okay, and then loons. How many people knew we had loons here in the winter? Yeah, a lot of people are surprised by that. And they don't look the same. You know, they lose their beautiful plumage that you would see when you're like up on a lake in Maine or New Hampshire. So the one to the left is a common loon. So that's the one we're familiar with if you're like on a lake up north. And they come here for the winter. Now, I haven't been seeing many this winter. Have people been seeing them? I don't. You have? Okay. At Douse's. Okay, that's good. I lived further down the Cape, and I seem to see more down there in the late winter as they're getting ready, staging to go north. And that's a bird that definitely will only go as far south as it needs to go. So if we freeze up here, it'll go a little further south. It's amazing. I know someone that lives on a lake up in Maine, and they said the day after the ice is out, the loons show up. Like, I don't know how they know that, because it's not even the same day every year. But it's just amazing. And they definitely have territorial lakes that they go back to every year in several generations that they'll have their nest on. But here it's just wherever there's food. That's all these birds that come here for the winter. You'll see them start to do some of their mating rituals and getting paired off like in March before they move north. But otherwise, they're just here to have food. So they're not territorial. They're not calling. You might hear the loon call. Sometimes you do, especially more towards spring. But mostly they're not doing any of that territorial stuff. They're not trying to mate. They're just trying to feed. So they'll feed on fish. And then this guy here, he's feeding on a crab. And they have this gray back with a white belly. And then to the right is a lesser known, but actually more common loon on the Cape in the winter is the red-throated loon. So the red-throated loon is about half the size of the common loon. It's not as bulky, much thinner neck. And it has, as you get more to spring and they start to get their breeding plumage again, you can see a little redness on their neck. But we actually have more of these in the winter than we do common loons, and they breed up in Alaska. They come all the way down and spend the winter here. And they breed up in the tundra lakes, not the forested lakes like the common loon in northern US. Okay, so here are another couple really beautiful winter ocean ducks you might see. So the one on the right is this guy that's over here on the right of the table. Does anyone know what that's called? Well, I got it up there. Harlequin duck. It's a harlequin duck. It's like a harlequin is like the Joker on a deck of cards. Very colorful. They're beautiful. The only place I ever see them on the Cape is Nauset Beach. They like rocks. And when I used to work at Yellowstone National Park, they bred up in the Yellowstone River and they breed around these rocks. But we don't have a lot of rocky ocean habitat on the Cape. Rhode Island has a lot of harlequin ducks if you go down to like South County, Rhode Island in the winter. But the one to the left, you'll definitely see those around. That's the long-tailed duck. the former name of that was the old squaw, so you might have heard it referred to as that, but they changed that a few years back. And male and female, they have a really long, thin tail that sticks out that's really noticeable. The male is very colorful, even in the winter. It's got that beautiful pattern on its head, and the female, not so much. Most of these birds, the males are more colorful than the female because they're the ones having to attract a mate. They do all that showing off work. So that's why they have such colorful feathers. So the longtails, you'll see them in Nantucket Sound individually. When I lived out on Nantucket, you'd see huge flocks of them flying over it every day at sunset. They'd fly over from one side of the island to the other, and they'd roost on the far side of the island. I heard those numbers are way down. Their numbers are down a lot, and scientists are trying to figure out why that is. In the harbors, you might see them, and then on the outer Cape as well. All right, so these are some ducks that maybe people are a little more familiar with. So the pair in the middle of the table is a male and female common eider. And then to the right, and the other three are all different species of scoters. So there's white-winged scoters, common scoters, and surf scoters. And all four of these species come to the Cape from the Arctic. They come to the Cape for the winter. And they all feed on mussels. So if you go off Chatham, like where the fish pier is, you'll see huge flocks of these, especially the common eiders. And they're diving down, pulling mussels up off the ground, and then swallowing them whole. They can digest the shell and everything. These are all species that some hunters go for. They don't taste very good, but I guess because they're in such big flocks and they fly back and forth, that they're popular for hunters. So mostly on the Chatham area for the big flocks, but anywhere else you could see these in the Sound or in the Bay. So here's the loons again. Common loon and the red-throated loon, what they would look like in the summertime when they're breeding. Or so even like late winter, early spring here, you might get to see them start to develop these colors. Okay, and so here's our favorite of many people. Has anyone seen a snowy owl yet this year? You have? You can't tell us though, right? Where? Oh, Sandy Neck, there's one? Okay. Yeah, most people try to keep those kind of secret just because they're very easily disturbed. But I haven't seen one yet. They're always great. Usually there's one at Sandy Neck, usually one at Race Point, Nauset Beach, Plymouth Beach, Duxbury Beach. A few years ago, there was one at West Dennis Beach. That was a problem because there's a parking lot right there. And, you know, they don't do well with a lot of people around, but they're pretty chill birds. They just kind of hang out most of the day. And then if you go out at sunset, you'll see them go out and like hunt for ducks. They like to hunt ducks, so that's why they're living on the beach. Plus, it kind of reminds them of their home. They live on the Arctic tundra, so it's an open, flat habitat. Lots of bird life to feed on, and mice and rodents. And actually, the #1 place to see snowy owls in Massachusetts. Does anyone know? Well, Plum Island's really good, but Logan Airport's the best because of the rats. Yeah. So there's someone out there every winter, and he's tagged dozens of these, and they study them, and sometimes they have to relocate them because they don't want them to get in the way of the planes. So they love that airport habitat because of it's like tundra and a lot of rats to feed on. So they come. The last really big year we had what's called an eruption, 2014. So their main prey up in the Arctic is lemmings. And when there's a good lemming year, like a lot of lemmings are born, they get a lot of food. So they have more babies. And when that happens, that following winter, we'll see a lot down here because there's so many snowy owls, they have to spread out. And the young ones are kind of kicked out to find new territory because there's too crowded up there. So those are the years we get the most snowy owls. So 2014, we had a lot. And every year we get a few, but there hasn't been a big eruption year like that since. Okay, so the way I'm organizing this, each habitat ends with the predator. So this would be the predator bird out on the beach. And here's another predator bird that you might see out on the beach in the winter, a peregrine falcon. They love to eat waterfowl and gulls. That's a bird that it breeds not too far north. They breed in the Custom Tower in Boston. They breed in Springfield. They breed on a bridge in Fall River. So they're really traditionally they would breed on rocky cliffs, and they still do way far up north. But sometimes they're able to create artificial nesting habitats for them in some of the structures in our cities. Acadia National Park, they breed on the cliffs there. So oftentimes these birds will come down here in the winter and they'll feed off our abundance of waterfowl on the beaches. But usually you're just kind of seeing them pass through. They don't really stay in one place for too long. I remember maybe 30 years ago, I was fishing out at Newcomb Hollow Beach in Wellfleet, and I pulled a skate up and I was dragging it up onto the shore, and a peregrine falcon just came down and landed on it and just started tearing it apart. And I couldn't even scare it away to get my hook out. And one of the old fishermen there, I don't know if this is true, he said a lot of the peregrine falcons that come here, they breed in such remote places that they're not used to people, so they're not afraid of us. But that's probably not true of the city ones, but some of the ones that come here that are from remote northern areas might be true. Okay, so the salt marsh is a really important habitat on Cape Cod, not only for birds, but for all of us in terms of, absorbing floods and for all the shellfish and other things that are able to live there. And if you go to a salt marsh in the winter, you're most likely to see a great blue heron. So we don't get breeding great blue herons here. We have other heron colonies, but generally we don't have breeding great blue herons. They spend the winter here because the water stays open. So if you ever drive out Route 2 west of Boston, you'll see all these beaver ponds where the trees have all died, and then there's a bunch of big nests in them. Those are great blue heron rookeries. We do have night-crowned heron rookeries, one in Harwich at Bell's Neck and one at Eastham at Nauset Marsh. But generally, great blue herons, we're going to see these guys in the winter here, as long as the water stays open. And then another really common bird you're going to see in the salt marsh on the Cape in the winter is what we call dabbling ducks. So there are dabbling ducks and diving ducks. Dabbling ducks sit on top of the water and then they just stick their head down and their butt sticks up and they're feeding like that. That's called dabbling, as opposed to diving, which are just swimming around going for fish. So these are two really common species, the mallard, male and female, and then the American black duck. American black duck and the female mallard look kind of similar. In fact, they're so close that they were breeding together for a while. And back in the 80s, they were really concerned that this hybridized duck that they were creating was going to make the black duck go extinct because the hybrids weren't fertile. But that seems to have not been as much of an issue anymore. But the black duck has a little more purple on its wing than the female mallard has more of a blue color. But these are, and they're in the middle there. That's the hybrid of the two. But these are birds that definitely are going to enjoy living in the salt marsh. And if you're out on a salt marsh like Sandy Neck, you're going to probably see this predator out there, the northern harrier. Bless you. Has anyone ever seen one of these? You must be a birder. Yeah. Okay. They're actually here year round. They breed out here in the marsh, so they're the only hawk that breeds on the ground as opposed to up in a tree. And if you see, a really broad wing but thin bird, it's got a white band on its tail, flying, hovering over the marsh, maybe just 4 or 5 feet above the marsh, looking for little critters in there to eat. That's a northern harrier, and they're a species of special concern. They're not endangered, but their numbers are low. Ponds and bays, another great habitat here in the winter. So this is Salt Pond out at the Visitor Center in Eastham at the National Seashore. Oftentimes this will freeze in the winter, but I was over there the other day and it's open right now. And that's where you're gonna find the diving ducks. So these are ducks again that, like the loon and the gannet, their feet are so far back on their body that they can't come ashore, and they're very awkward on shore. They can only be down in the water. These guys will go to shore to breed though, but not here. They come here in the winter, and then they go to the freshwater ponds in Maine, in northern New England in the summer. So they can live in salt water in the winter, freshwater in the summer, and they breed in tree holes. So like if a woodpecker or some other animal made a cavity in a tree, in a dead tree, that's where they're gonna breed. So they will use nest boxes for that reason. So the common merganser to the right, male and female, male with the green, female with the brown. Then the red-breasted merganser down here on the lower right, and a little smaller than the common, and then the hooded merganser. I think hooded merganser is probably one of the most beautiful ducks that we get here, and they're pretty common around here. I know there's a pond, you know, where 149 hits 28, the mill pond there. Usually some good ducks there. Usually is hooded mergansers there. Skunk Net pond up here in Osterville, Audubon property. I've seen hooded mergansers there. And the male is just really, really spectacular. It's got this beautiful white crest and big hood and yellow eye. If you go to a little more open spot, you're probably going to see these guys. So on the left is the ringneck duck. It actually has a ring bill, but they call it the ringneck. So a lot of birds, they got their names by ornithologists in the old days. They would kill them and then really get a really good close look at them and name them that way. Like there's a sandpiper called the semi-palmated sandpiper, which means its feet are palmated or webbed only semi, like halfway up its foot. Well, you wouldn't tell that unless you're holding it in your hand. So these guys do have a ring neck, but you can't see it unless you're holding it in your hand. So ring bill is how you distinguish the ringneck duck. And this is a bufflehead. I'm sure people have seen these. These are really cute little guys. They call them butterballs. And they are in anywhere there's open ponds, bays. They're in Nantucket Sound. They're not in the outer ocean, but they're just like protected open water. Again, both of these species, they're cavity nesters up in northern New England once the ice goes out. And some more of these, greater and lesser scaup. So if you have more of a big lake, like maybe Waquacket Lake has these, I know Long Pond in Harwich has big flocks of these guys. The greater and the lesser scaup, greater just a little bit bigger, the lesser is actually more common. And then this guy in the bottom is a ruddy duck. So oftentimes from a distance, you can't see that beautiful coloration in the front, but you're going to see the tail that sticks up. And so if you see kind of a chunky little duck, usually with scaup or ringnecks and the tail is sticking up, those are ruddy ducks. I know early in the winter, there's a flock, about 50 of those out at Herring Pond in Eastham, but I don't know any place around here that, has anyone seen any of these ducks this winter around closer to here?
Any of those are already done.
Any of these divers?
There's been scoff in Bay right here by Boat Brand.
Okay.
Small numbers, other large flocks. With binoculars, not far back.
So that's East Bay Road, just down to the end?
Yep, right where it bends at the town boat ramp.
Okay.
There's a nice bump there for the ramp itself to look if they kind of in that direction.
Okay, I'll check that out when I leave. Anyone else? How about golden eyes? Anyone seen golden eyes? Where are they? Around here.
Douses.
Douses, okay.
Fish pond, fishing pier.
Okay. Golden eyes are really cool birds. If a duck is out there and you're not sure what it is and it flies and you hear it whistling, it's a golden eye. They make a whistling sound when they fly, but they do have this gold eye. So if you have a close enough look, you can see them. both barrows and common golden eyes. They breed in Alaska. They come here in the winter. The male with the barrows has a bluish purple head, and then with the common a green head, and the female with the brown. Divers, open water, salt or fresh. And then more dabbling ducks. These are ducks that you're probably going to also see at that mill pond. I know most times I go by there, I see that duck in the middle, the widgeon, the black and the mallard. And these are a little more rare, canvasbacks and northern shovelers, but we do get these here in the winter. A couple of winters ago, I saw a canvasback out at Wakeby Pond in Mashpee. It was with a big flock of scaup. And right now for most of the winter, there's been northern shovelers at in Harwich, that new property they created where they restored an old cranberry bog, Cold Brook, I think it was called. Yeah, there's been 5 or 6 northern shovelers hanging out there. I don't know of any other place necessarily where they've been seen, but like the salt ponds in Falmouth would be a good place to look. The mill pond. There's a really great pond off 6A in West Barnstable. You kind of have to park in the neighborhood and follow a path out to it, Myrtle Road. But if you can find it on your GPS, there's a path to take you out there, and you can see a lot of these ducks out there too. For some reason, get a good variety there. And pintail, I've definitely seen in the skunk net. Every winter I see them on the skunk net pond, Audubon property. There's a little spot in the southern end of that pond where there's some stumps and they hang out there. I've seen them at Beach Forest in Provincetown. So the male pintail is a beautiful bird. It's got the long pointy tail like the long-tailed duck, but this is a freshwater species, and they keep that beautiful plumage all winter long, the brown head. And then gadwalls, that place in Harwich, the Coldbrook has gadwalls this year as well. And I think Mill Pond in Marston's Mills does too. Blue and green winged teal. So teal are smaller, about half the size of these others, but they're really cute and beautiful birds. Freshwater only, you're going to see them in flocks. I've seen them at Bell's Neck in Harwich a lot. I'm sure I've seen them in the mill pond. I'm sure any little pond you can find around here, you have a chance of seeing blue and green winged teal. They don't go quite as far. Both of these guys here and also these guys, they don't go quite as far north to breed. Sometimes you'll actually get them breeding in north central Massachusetts, southern New England. And they're not cavity nesters. So if you're at a pond, the one thing the ducks have to worry about, the one predator, is going to be the bald eagle. So to the left is the mature bald eagle, to the right is an immature bald eagle. So we always used to just see these immature bald eagles here in the winter. You know, you'd be rare to see 1 or 2 all winter long. Just young birds that kind of traveling, you know, they're not breeding. Eagles start breeding very early. They'll start breeding now by the end of January because it takes them so long to build their big nest and to incubate. But now we have about 3 pairs breeding on the Cape, bald eagles. We have a pair in Brewster, and I think there's a pair up here in Barnstable somewhere. They've kept that pretty secret. You know where it is?
But I saw one. I'm from Seattle. Have them everywhere.
Oh yeah.
But one flew down. I got one of my ducks. Heartbreaking.
Here.
Yeah.
Really?
I live on the pond, and I can hear them too flying. They make noise.
What pond is that?
Pond.
Snake Pond in South Sandwich, Forestdale? Yeah. Oh wow, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, there's a chance he's just spending the winter here. You know, he may not be living here. Because they breed so early, a lot of them they'll take over, like this is what happened in Eastham. They'll take over an osprey nest, and then when the ospreys show up in March, they scare them away. They can't. I don't know. They're bigger than ospreys, but for some reason they don't stand up to them. We had the same thing happen in Mashpee with a great horned owl. We had a great horned owl nest in the parking lot at the government center in Mashpee. They start breeding in January as well. And when the osprey showed up, they scared them off, and they abandoned this nest that they had already started. But generally they prefer tall trees, like the top of a white pine. That's where they would most generally breed. But we just don't have a lot of tall trees on the Cape anymore. All right, so this might be some of the birds people are more familiar with, maybe in your backyard, or birds that come to your feeder. So these are some birds that are pretty common, right? The chickadee and the titmouse, they're here in the winter, but they're also here in the summer. They're here year round. But this guy on the left is only here in the winter, the dark-eyed junco. So you won't see them on the feeder. They're just going to be on the ground eating the scraps that fall to the ground. And they'll be gone come April. They're moving north, and they breed up in the Arctic. And then a lot of other beautiful birds that we get. These are all year-round species: the cardinal, goldfinch, blue jay, mourning dove, tufted titmouse, house finch. These are all birds that you're going to see year-round, and they'll be at your feeders all winter. The goldfinch, they breed very late. They don't breed until August, because that's when the thistle blooms. So that's what this one's doing. It's feeding its young some thistle seeds. So if you have feeders, you know they prefer the thistle to anything else, the most expensive one. But in the winter, they're not going to have that bright yellow. They're going to be like the one on the left. The females are always that color, but in the winter, the males go from bright yellow to the same as the female. Because, you know, birds molt as seasons change and to grow new feathers, and all that takes energy. In the winter, it's all about just survival, using as little energy and getting as much food as you can. So you may see these guys at your feeder, but if not, you're going to see them kind of crawling up and down the trees. So white-breasted nuthatch, they'll definitely come to your feeder. They'll eat sunflower seed, and red-breasted nuthatch as well. Red-breasted nuthatch is strictly a pine species. So if you have a lot of pine trees around, you'll get them. And a lot of them come here in the winter, and then they go north in the summer to breed. So they breed up in the pine forest up north, but they will also breed here. So we have both migratory and year-round population. And same for the brown creeper. It's the one over to the left. Anyone think they've ever seen a brown creeper?
Uh,
Not on Cape? Yeah. Where was yours? Colorado. Okay. Yeah, they're not super abundant here, but we have a few. You know, if you have dead trees in your property, I know we don't like to keep them for safety reasons and all, but they do provide a lot of habitat for birds, not only the nesting cavity, but also the food. They love to eat the insects on those dead trees, but you'll also see them on live trees, kind of prying insects out behind the bark. And what these three species can all do, which is unusual, is they don't perch on a branch. They just go up and down vertically on this trunk itself. They don't go out to the branches. We were talking about woodpeckers when some of the people first started coming. Our two main common species are the hairy and the downy. So this picture here, that's not an adult with a baby. That's actually an adult hairy and an adult downy. So they have all the same colors. They're just different sizes. And the male will have the red cap on his head. The female won't. They're a year-round species. They'll come to suet if you have suet out. Not really seed eaters. On the far left is the northern flicker. So they'll come to suet. They'll also take seed. They're probably the bird that you don't want to have too many around, because they tend to like be pecking at your house and on the flashing on your chimney, and they make a lot of noise when they're trying to look for food or find a mate. By making that noise, that's how they do it. But they're really beautiful. If you get a close look at them, they've got beautiful colors, the spotted, and then even their tail has these like really bright yellow feathers on it. And then in the middle is a red-bellied woodpecker. So again, you might say, well, it's got a red head is more prominent than its red belly. It does have a little red on its belly, but again, it was named such because there is another bird called a red-headed woodpecker that's much rarer. It's so remember Woody Woodpecker? So he was like the colors of a red-headed woodpecker, but the size of a pileated woodpecker. So he was kind of a combination of both. These guys, only in the last 20 years, we're seeing these red-bellied woodpeckers. That's a southern species that as the climate has warmed, they've moved north. So they're pretty common now. Just about everyone's yard, if you have suet out, you're going to get red bellies. They have a really high-pitched call. Winter on the Cape is great for birds because we have so much wild fruit. So if you get a chance to plant native trees that produce fruit, that's a great way to see birds. That and having open water. Yes.
So we have a holly here, like 2 stories.
Yeah, they can get big.
So if they usually, like, we have the red berries on them. And it'll be little bullet of bird, or I guess flock of birds come in and one day they're gone, and a couple hours over there they're gone. And usually, I could be wrong, but usually cackle. But this year, I thought I saw like robins. Yeah, winter robins.
Yeah.
And I didn't think there was winter robins.
Yeah. What was the other bird you said? Grackles?
Cackle?
Cackles. I'm not familiar with them.
They're black. I'm calling them cackles. I'm probably calling them
Oh,
wrong.
starlings maybe?
Cackles.
Oh, grackles. Yeah, so on the Cape, we get these huge flocks of winter robins. They're mostly Canadian robins. So, yeah, like a lot of the robins you'll have like on your yard in the spring, they go further south in the winter. But we get these, they're chunkier, bigger than the breeding robins here. Yeah, so they're from Canada. They come down in these huge flocks. They stay in flocks all winter, and they just move from one holly to another. So, holly is a great, if you get the American holly, it's a great native species to have. Winterberry is another one. It requires a little more of a wet habitat to grow. But winterberry are great, and it's really pretty to have. Like around Christmas time when all the leaves are gone, you have, especially you have snow, you have this winterberry out there. But then one day when the robins find it, it's gone. And they'll just devastate it. As well as, so the robins are the most aggressive in the most numbers, but we also have these other waxwings that will come down. Cedar waxwings and Bohemian waxwings, mostly cedar waxwings, because they prefer cedar trees. So the juniper berries on the red cedar. And the waxwing has that little yellow tip at the bottom. It kind of looks like a female cardinal, but it's got, a different kind of, it's got the crest and the mask, but it's just a different body shape. It's a little small. It's really beautiful. But juniper berries on red cedar, holly, winterberry, great. Even on the far side, they're bittersweet. Even though bittersweet's an invasive plant, the birds will eat it. And then in the middle, they're eating, what's that? People planted privet. Privet produces a fruit that stays on really late into the winter because it's like their last choice. So nobody wants to eat it, but by the time February, March comes, they'll be eating it. So robins and waxwings are really fond of all those. And you're really only going to get those in your yard with these berries. They're not going to come to feeders. Unless they're really desperate, a robin might go to a feeder, but usually it's berries, and there's no worms for them to eat. Bluebirds are another bird that won't come to a feeder usually, but they'll go to berries. So here's a winterberry, and same thing, you get a flock of them, and they'll hang out there, but they're not as aggressive as the robins. They might eat a little bit, come back the next day, eat a little bit. You'll see them back and forth. So the bluebirds that are here, some come down from the north for the winter, but others are year-round birds. The waxwings, the cedar waxwings we have year-round. The Bohemian waxwing it's just a little different. Under its tail, it's got like a ruddy color. as opposed to nothing on the cedar. So like its name, they're Bohemians. They just kind of move around all the place. They don't really settle anywhere. So they kind of like cowbirds. They're just used to being vagrants and they don't spend a lot of time defending a territory. So you could see them at any point mixed in usually with a flock of cedar waxwings. And so here's just an example of the cedar waxwings breeding range. So permanent resident in the pink, so we're in there. Further south, just winter. Further north, just breeding. And the Bohemian, much more of a northern species. So come here, they're pretty rare. We're not even included on this map, but they will winter, come as far south as us to winter, even though this is showing just northern New England. And then there's different species of finches that also do like the snowy owl, do eruptions. So it's not lemmings that send them here, but cones. So the snowy owls come when there's an abundance of lemmings. These birds come when there's a scarcity of cones. So birds like red and white-winged crossbills and evening grosbeaks, they are northern birds that feed on the pine cone seeds and spruce cones. And when there's a scarcity of them up north, they'll come this far south. So a few years ago, there was a really good year for them. Evening grosbeaks, they used to be much more of a common winter resident. We used to get them on the Cape at feeders. They'll only come to a platform feeder. So you got to have sunflower seeds, and it's got to be like in an open, flat feeder. They won't come to one where you got to perch and pick at it because they're really have big bills and they're very chunky body, but they're beautiful. Is anyone getting any this winter at their feet? Yeah, I put one of those out just because I so want to get them, but then the squirrels just end up eating everything. So I haven't seen any. Crossbills, some years I've seen those, not so much in my feeders, but just if you're ever walking through the woods and you hear like chipping up in the tops of the pine trees, look up and it's probably crossbills. And their bills cross over, like the top and the bottom don't come together, they cross. It's almost like, looks like a defect, but they use that to pry the seeds out of the cones. And pine siskins as well are another seed eater. They definitely will come to your seed feeders. They're a northern species. Every so often we'll get them down here. And then purple finch. So a lot of people what's the word I'm looking for? They confuse purple finches and house finches. House finches are the year-round. They're going to nest on a wreath on your front door. They'll nest anywhere. Purple finches are much more, not going to be nesting around humans. Much more of a transitory, rare winter visitor. I don't think the Cape gets any breeding purple finches. You might in inland northern Massachusetts. So here's that evening grosbeak I was talking about. Again, they breed north, but they are pretty regular winter visitors. It's just they're rare. Their numbers have just become so low. So there are some around on the Cape every winter. Like if you look at the bird report every week that comes out, every week there's someone's got evening grosbeaks at their feeder, but they're just not as common as they used to be. They don't want people. They don't say where, they want people going to someone's yard to look at. And then if you're in your backyard, in the forest or your yard, these are the predators that are most likely going to feed on your birds, especially the two on the left. So the Cooper's hawk they've become much more common than they used to be. Every neighborhood now seems to have a Cooper's hawk. They used to be called a chicken hawk because they like chickens. But it's funny, I have chickens and I have an adult Cooper's hawk that just leaves them alone, but I have in the middle there is a juvenile Cooper's hawk, and I'm sorry, that's a sharpshin, but a juvenile Cooper's hawk has the same plumage as a sharpshin, it's just bigger, and he tries to get the chickens. I guess he hasn't learned yet. Maybe the old one has learned it's not worth the effort. Definitely a red tail will take chickens. They're much bigger, but the Cooper and the sharpshin, they're more likely to take your birds at the bird feeder. Sharpshin is smaller than a Cooper's, so they're very agile. They can fly through the forest and dodge the trees and all that. They don't have to soar like the bigger hawks do. So that what makes them much more of a predator for feeding birds.
I'll think of an animal with red tail like that.
Oh, I don't know what its wingspan would be. I would guess probably 5 feet.
Right.
Oh, so a red tail would kill like a rabbit or a squirrel. They'll eat roadkill that's bigger, but they probably couldn't carry anything off bigger than a rabbit or a skunk, maybe, probably not a raccoon. Whereas an owl could take a bigger bird.